Welcome, everyone, to the Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group meetup for the Thursday, August 19th, 2021 edition, where we have Reid Havens bringing us Bedazzling Your Bookmarks and Buttons. As a joke last time, I'm pretty sure that only Reid could come up with the title of Bedazzling, but I'm super excited to go and see what's going to be coming on here. Funny story, I was actually in a coffee shop today, and I was talking to my wife, and she said, "What session's tonight?" I said, "Oh, it's the Bedazzling session," and the barista looked up and went, "What are you guys bedazzling?" I'm like, Power BI dashboard. Oh, okay. So there you go. I don't think they quite followed, but that's all good. So as we say, we're going to be getting into that shortly. Right now, we're just doing our little bit of an intro before Reid comes on to the main stage here. Joseph's going to be giving us the what's new in Power BI that he's had more than 24 hours to prepare for. So we're expecting lots of good things here today. One thing I do want to throw out, today's session is sponsored by SkillWave, the home of awesome Power BI and Power Query and Power Pivot training. Our featured course for today is Designing Impactful Reports, which is done by our featured speaker, Reid here. He's got a great course on SkillWave, which will help you make some awesome visualization tweaks to your dashboards and make them look amazing. If you haven't checked that out, you should definitely do so. The link to this is included in the documents that are already up on the Meetup site there, so you can always go and check that out. Some really cool stuff there. It's got some great reviews, and we think it'll make your dashboard look amazing and really get some buy-in from different people there. Our next meetups that are coming up on Thursday, September 9th, we're pleased to be joined by Avani Reddy. She is going to be doing a session on modern collaboration in Excel, all the cool things you can do with Office 365 and collaboration. That's fantastic. She works on the Modern Collab team, so it's straight from the Microsoft presenters there for the people that are actually building it, so that'll be pretty cool. And then our next Power BI meetup that we have coming back, we're really excited to be bringing back Peter Myers. I guess he's lonely down in Australia and really wants to talk to us again. We've got a great session coming up with him on demystifying Power BI data sets. Always a joy to have Peter with us, and very much looking forward to that. So those sessions are open for RSVPs, so make sure that you get your name on those tracks there. If you missed it, Master Your Data with Excel and Power BI, the long awaited version of the second edition of MS for DataMonkey is finally now available. You can pick that up at SkillWave in digital edition. Currently, it has the PDF versions. In around the first week of September, we'll also be adding the Kindle edition to that as well. But you can get the PDF right now, and the reviews on it are coming in, are really good. I'm really pleased with that. So definitely are hoping people will check that out. Kirill, I just answered your question right there. Perfect. Awesome. The last thing that I want to say before I turn this over to Joseph is, speaking of Joseph, he's actually not going to be here to join us on September 23rd. So we are looking for someone who would be interested in taking on the What's New in Power BI session. So if you're interested in coming on and joining us and giving us a quick, what's new as far as things go on. If the release doesn't come out in time, we'll take what's your favorite things that are new over the last little while. It's all good there. We're just basically looking for someone who wants to cut their teeth and try out our stage and put together a presentation of some cool stuff you can do with Power BI, preferably on the what's new. But if not, fall back to something else. Totally good. If you're interested, shoot Rebecca an email and we'll get you on stage here. And if we're not, well, you never know. It might just be me that ends up doing it, but we'll see. All right. Now, on that note, I'm going to fade to black here. And I'm going to cut the screen back over to Joseph, and we'll get into the what's new in Power BI for August.
Lovely. Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
No worries.
So hey everybody, another month of Vancouver Power BI User Group. As Ken said in the intro, my name is Joseph, and I typically do the what's new in Power BI. Just before we jump in, just going to do quick introduction of myself, just for those of you who haven't been here before. So I'm currently a senior financial analyst at the Business Intelligence and Data Analysis program at Corporate Finance Institute. So I use SQL, Excel, Power Query, and Excel and Power BI, Python, R, Tableau, really anything to model, manipulate, analyze, and visualize data. I have my website, feathersanalytics.com, where I blog a lot about Power BI, a little bit about R, but really my passion is bringing a lot of these tools together to generate better insights and help make better decisions for businesses. I will put my LinkedIn and my Twitter up just at the end of the session. But please feel free to connect. Love connecting with the analytics community. If you have any questions of stuff that I have covered today, or any questions about updates that I don't have a chance to cover, would love to have a chat. So let's jump right into it. So for updates for the August release for Power BI, best place to start, I always start here, is the feature summary blog on the Microsoft website. They list all of the new features into nice sort of little sections here. So we have reporting, analytics, modeling, some of the data connectivity and Power Query, and so on. And so if any of these catch your eye, you can just sort of drill down, click on the link, and you can go down here. And there's usually an accompanying YouTube video as well, where you can see a little bit more of a hands-on demo. So my favorite releases or my favorite features from this month's release, let's jump into Power BI. So I'll pull up my demo report here. And the first one has to do with the Q&A visual. So I've covered this in quite a few of the what's new in Power BI. There's always new sort of little tweaks and enhancements coming to the Q&A visual. And this is the one in the bottom right-hand corner here. And what the Q&A visual is, it's an artificial intelligence visual. And it leverages natural language querying to generate insights and generate visuals for your Power BI report. So you can see in this sort of text box here, I've just typed in a question for the data in this report. I said, okay, can we look at total balance by product category? And we can see that we have my total balance measure from the report, product category on the axis. And I could also say as a column chart, for instance, and then we can change the actual visualization type down here. Won't go into too much detail. I have covered it before, lots of blog posts and videos about the Q&A visual. But the update I like from this month is using synonyms across your organization. So what do I mean by synonyms? Well, if I delete the question, if I say something like sales by product category, we see that this word sales has a double underline. And if I click on it here, the visual is not sure what I mean. I either need to define it as a term within the visual, but really what I want to do is add a synonym. So if I go to the settings and go to field synonyms, when I say sales in my report, really what I mean is this total balance measure. So if I add sales here, and then it loads, now that I've added that and I exit out, we can see that sales has become a recognized term. It has that blue underline. And now when I look at sales by product category, it knows, oh, okay, I've typed in sales, but what I really mean from the report view is total balance. So that's how we can use synonyms within the visual. But what we can do now is actually share these synonyms across the organization. So this means that we can now leverage these synonyms and this work across teams and really minimize sort of that duplicate effort when we're adding synonyms to our models. So we can enable this sharing in a few different places. If I go to File and Options within the Power BI report, and in the current file settings under data load, we can see in the Q&A section down here, we now have share your synonyms with everyone in the organization. So that box has been checked there. And if I jump into the Power BI service, so if you go to a workspace, go to data sets, and I'm in my what's new in Power BI data set here. And if I go to settings, I can scroll down to the Q&A section. And then same thing here, I can now have the option to share synonyms with everyone in the organization. So we can set it within the report itself, or, oh, someone's dog is out of control. Goodness. We can set it in two different places, within the report itself or within the Power BI service. So that's my first favorite feature from this month, that little enhancement to the Q&A visual. But let's jump into Power BI. The next is an update to some DAX syntax. So if I go to my fact table and go to new measure, it's a new way that we can define measures and things in DAX for date and date time fields. So if I need to create a new measure in my model, and we'll call it like start date, something creative. How we've been able to sort of previously define a date that can serve as a measure is using the date function, and then we can just type in a date like 0303, for instance, something like that. And if we make a little bit of room for it, just under here, if I drag start date onto my report canvas, change that to a card, we can see that this is actually set as a date time data type right now, this measure, but we can see it's 3rd of March, 2019. But if I did want to change the time from kind of the default 12 a.m., I could pair this with the time function as well. And then we can say something like 6:30:00, and then this will update my measure down here. So now it's 6:30 a.m., or alternatively, if we wanted it PM, we could go 18, and then it switches to PM here. So this experience, like it's okay, it's not great. We have to use 2 different functions. We have to add them together. But what we can do now is define this date and date time fields in a slightly different way. So if I add a new measure, and we can call this important date, we have some new syntax that we can use outside of using some of these DAX functions. So we can use DT, and I'll say 2020-03-03, just like that, defining a new important date measure. And if we change the visual to a multi-row card, I'll drag important date onto it too. And now we can see that we have start date and important date both give the same output, but they look just a little slightly different way that we can define them. What I can do as well is if same thing as I did before, adding the time function, so having to go to a different DAX function, I can still define if I want it to be like 6:30, I can go 06:30:00, just like that. And we can see down here now we've switched to 6:30 a.m. like I had done using sort of the previous DAX functions. We can also just leave a space, take away that T. If I want it to be 18 like that, I can hit enter, hit OK there. And now we've switched it to 6:30 p.m. So this is a little bit more efficient. It's probably a little bit more user friendly. Like I can just look at this date exactly and know exactly what date and time that I'm looking at. Whereas before, this is still pretty readable, but it's just not how we would generally type in a date or a date time value. So just a quick little enhancement there that's going to make it easier to deal with dates and date times when we're using DAX. The last feature that I'm going to cover for today has to do with x-axis constant line improvements. And I don't think that I've actually covered the constant lines in the analytics pane with the visual before. So I'm just going to go over that really quickly, and then I'll cover some of the improvements that came out this month. So if I click on this line chart visual in the top left-hand corner of my report, and then go to the analytics pane or the analytics tab within the visualizations pane, for a little bit now, we've now had our y-axis constant line and our x-axis constant line. So if I start with y-axis and add one, we can see that we just have a default value of 0, and that's this dotted line going horizontally across the visual. But I can set this to something like 15,000, hit OK, and now it's right through the middle of this trend graph. But let's change, we can have some formatting, so changing the color to red, making it a solid line, and maybe making it a little less transparent. We can drop that down to 10%. So now we have a solid line right through the middle of our report, so a y-axis constant line. We can have the same thing with an x-axis constant line as well. This will look a little bit different because this chart, the x-axis is a date field. We can see we have January, April, July across the x-axis of this chart visual. So when I go to define a value for the constant line here, I can actually just pick one from as a date value. I'm not typing in kind of a numeric value, I'm picking a date. So if I go back to 2020, yeah, let's just pick August 7th, something like that. And now we have this vertical line through our line chart as well. We can make this one red, we can make it dotted maybe, and a little less transparent as well. We can drop that down. So these constant lines are a really great way to sort of add context or call out specific times or relative values in your report. We can just type in sort of a hard-coded value as we did there. But one thing that we can also do is have it be driven by a measure or by some sort of formula. So I can add a second x-axis constant line. And instead of selecting a date, kind of hard coding it in, I can hit the formula button, this FX button. And I can add a line based on actually the measures that we just created, start date or important date. So if I pick important date here, now we have an additional vertical line within our line chart. Let's make this one maybe a dark purple if that stands out enough. We can set that transparency to 0 and let's make it solid. So within the report, we can also send it to back maybe. Within the report, now we have, instead of just a hard-coded value that we may need to go and update, if this important date is referenced throughout our report, if I go into that measure, and let's say instead of the March 3rd, we want to look at January 3rd, and I hit OK, that line shifts back a little bit in our report. So it's dynamic. We don't have to worry about updating that date manually within the visual itself. It's now driven by a DAX measure. And one of the new features or enhancements to this constant line that we released this month is this shade region option down here in formatting. So we can now shade the chart before or after this constant line. So if we go before, we could have this line and kind of say, oh, this was a pre-pandemic world, maybe this is a post-pandemic world, or maybe we did like a major systems migration within the organization, or we had a merger with another company. But this is a great way that we can, again, just add a little bit more visual context to our report visuals, and we can really call out so it's really clear to the report users, oh yeah, something happened important, not only on this day, but maybe before and after this day as well. We have the same formatting options. I can do it that same purple, make it a little bit more, maybe make this a little bit more transparent so it's easy to see as well. So really like this shade region. I think it's going to be extremely useful with a few different reporting scenarios within Power BI, and really like that it can be both formula driven and have sort of that relative shading from that specific point. So those are my 3 favorite features from this month's Power BI release, from the August release. If you have any questions for that, please feel free to reach out. I think my Twitter and my LinkedIn information is on the Meetup site. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ken and over to Reid for his bedazzling presentation. So really looking forward to seeing that. So thanks everyone for your time. Going to hand it back now for feature presentation.
Hey, before you run, Joseph, Santosh has got a question about the y-axis constant. Can you have a normal calculation like mean or average instead of manually choosing a figure like 15,000?
Yeah, you absolutely can. That might make a little bit more sense in this specific case as an as a y-axis constant. But yeah, for sure, if I had like the average count of clients, yeah, you can for sure plot like an average or a median or something like that in a visual as well.
Fantastic, thanks.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joseph. And yeah, now it's our pleasure to welcome Reid Havens to come and give us some awesome stuff on bedazzling bookmarks. So, Reid, you can take over the screen anytime you feel like it.
All right, let me PowerPoint it and share my screen. Let's see. Sweet. Can you see the screen? Audio's coming through okay?
Absolutely can. You bet.
Beautiful. The best part is we're like, is my audio working? Nope, can't hear you. Excuse me. Let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and share, get the presentation mode. Beautiful. So tonight, as Ken pointed out, I like to sprinkle fun and aesthetics into a lot of the stuff that I do. And I wanted a title that like rang a little bit. I could have done like beautify bookmarks, but you know, it had 3 B's. Bookmarks, buttons, I wanted a 3rd B, and bedazzling I thought worked well for that because they're, especially with one of the demos that I'm going to do today, there's a lot of fun to be had with some of the design that I throw into. And, you know, like with anything you do, it's nice to also learn something, but, you know, getting a chance to play around with the environment's enjoyable as well. But that leads into just talking a bit about myself. Like Ken, I've had the honor for a few years now of being an MVP. Ken's had quite a few years further than I in it, but I've happily just gotten my 4th chip on my little trophy this year for that, and it's something that I appreciate every year. But a lot of it comes from things like I'm doing here, in Ken's case, writing a book. But overall, it comes from community contributions, blogging, writing books, presenting, teaching, things that are, for the most part, not particularly monetarily incentivizing, but they're ways. It goes for people who are not only experts, but also just really like to get involved with the community and help to, like rising waters lift all ships mentality, get everybody, more familiar with the products and tools that they use. I focus a lot on aesthetics and design, something I just found that I kind of naturally shifted into back when I actually worked for other companies versus my own. I had multiple times where people kind of kept coming to me and asking for leverage to help design and like kind of upgrade their reports because they were a bit blah or maybe weren't using the right visuals. And as I started doing that quite a lot, I started blogging about it years ago at Power Pivot Pro, and since then I've shifted gears to doing like YouTube as essentially a part-time job these days. I do a video once a week on lots of cool little tips and tricks. I've also got into live streaming just because COVID has left me without being able to go in person for the most part for the last year and a half, and it was another way for me to kind of connect with the community by hosting essentially a user group, but on YouTube that I do myself, and I typically do those every Friday, time permitting, depending on where my presenter is around the world. But it's something that I really enjoy. So I'll have plenty of links for those if you're interested in learning more about some of the stuff that I do as well towards the end of it. But overall, I'll wrap up the conversation about me and talk a little bit about what we will be going over tonight. So with most of the presentations that I make, I really like to be able to have them very modular. So scale up and down, usually involving lots of fun little demos and tips and tricks and techniques. This is no different from some of the other ones that I've done as well. So it allows me to scale it down from 45 minutes up to, like an hour and a half or 2 hours at the, larger conferences. So we'll get through most of these. But if we don't, I'll also have links and resources as well for you to learn about some of these other techniques on your own time afterwards if you so desire. But like I mentioned, this is going to be primarily demonstration driven. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over to Power BI Desktop and just kind of dive into it. I did actually just finish up one thing today. So just to give you a little sneak peek of outside of Bookmarks and Buttons, a small incentive to maybe encourage you to check out the YouTube channel later. I just want to show you guys get a sneak peek of the video that I'm releasing next Tuesday. On actually a fun use case for the waterfall chart. My Zoom, it's working. So I personally, I occasionally use waterfall charts, but not a ton. And I ended up wanting to find a fun way to actually have a comparison for this. So I won't go into the details of how this was made. I just want to show you the actual outcome of it, and you can check out the video later if you want to. But as you can see here, I basically have two comparison values. Canada and Australia in this demo data set both have approximately the same revenue for whatever filters are on this page. There's the 278, there's the 277, but we get a breakdown between them to actually show that between these two, what makes up the delta between them and which are greater and which are less. And I wanted this to be dynamic and fun as a waterfall chart, so I actually created a couple of slicers that if I only select one value, it actually blanks it out, asks you to make sure to select another. And if I select 3, same thing, it says select only 2. So it forces adoption for the user to make sure that you select 2 values at a time. There you go. Now I can compare France and Germany, and you can see where the deltas between those. And I've also included an option where you can actually even choose what the breakdown is. You know what? Between these two, I would like to see for these countries, what companies sold more or less. Actually, maybe I don't care about that. Here's another attribute. What about if I cared about, in this case, color or product category? So I can actually choose the breakdown and the comparison to the two ends. And even a third fun thing, because this was a feature recently released last month, where you can dynamically with DAX adjust what the axis would be. So the default is dynamic for the waterfall. It does squish it, but it's a cautionary tale sometimes when you do that, because it's not always a fair comparison, because you are looking at a zoomed in perspective, which might make variances look bigger. So I did include even an option to have a y-axis of 0. So that actually now you can see it anchors it to 0. So it does show you that, yeah, there's a difference, but overall, the prices are actually pretty close to each other. But you basically can kind of zoom in and then zoom out on that, depending on if you want to adjust the axis. But this will be a video coming out next Tuesday. I actually had a lot of fun building this. That's why I figured out it would be a fun opportunity to show you a really clever way to use the waterfall chart. But check that out later. And again, I'll have the link to the YouTube channel at the end of this presentation. But we'll take that little teaser away. And let's start with actually talking about bookmarks and buttons themselves. So I will just start by saying one of the reasons that I still to this day, like I love to develop. I mean, I enjoy training and teaching and user groups like this, but development is what lets me learn new things pretty constantly. Clients will usually ask me to build something that I never would have thought of building. Like, well, okay, let's see how I can do this in Power BI. Is it possible? And it allows me to create lots of demos like this. This was a client scenario where they wanted a single click experience to be able to just come up, click a button, everything shows month, everything shows day, or everything shows quarter. So being able to navigate just seamlessly between those. Technically, it's possible. Like with most bookmarks, what you're usually doing is you're doing a click reduction. You're doing what otherwise could have been done by the user, but with less steps. So in this case, they could have come over here and individually to every visual moved it all down, but they wanted things to be in sync with each other rather than having to do that 4 or 5 or however many times there are a number of visuals on the page. So one teaches you a way that bookmarks, even though they started as a concept of basically being a macro for filters, like filter group A, filter group B, that might apply 5 or 6 filters at once. It can also capture a lot of different things in the actual capture states as well that are outside of just the scope of filters. In this case, the hierarchy navigation that you're seeing here is technically part of the filter capture, even though the filters on the visuals aren't changing. It is creating different categories of filters to provide different cuts of the data. So we'll see in a minute how to actually capture the bookmark to set this up, and also talk about some nuances with bookmarking that are important to note when you're creating them to make sure they don't break, because they're one of my favorite features in Power BI, but I think they're also one of the most fragile features in Power BI, and it's many different easy ways to break them. So, but to start with though, the other feature that I want to kind of do as a twofer for this demo is talk about how I'm creating these active and inactive bookmarks at the top. So the buttons, when I click quarter or I click month, that becomes darker, and it essentially is indicating via the visual to the user that, hey, this is the active one. I also have a tooltip that says selected time perspective. If I hover over this one, you'll notice that there's a hover effect, there's a click effect, and it also has a separate tooltip that says toggle this thing. So plenty of indicators of what is active and inactive. So it's designed in a way that makes it very clear to the user what has been toggled without having to have like a separate text box that tells you that. So let me copy and paste this out of here and zoom in so we can talk about it a little bit. And it's one of the things that I love about buttons that we'll be exploring in this topic today is there's a lot of ways to customize it, which are really cool. You have the primary states that are in here for many different attributes on a button. That includes the default, hover, or press. Disabled is a 4th newer state that came out last year for like the ability to actually drill through with a button between pages that I'll skip. But I'm going to cover today just the first 3 here that, as their name implies, relates to the various states that you have on a button. So the default state is when there is no mouse over it. The on hover state is when you are hovering. And then, as you can imagine, the press is what happens when a user clicks it. Now, it's not doing anything at the moment because in desktop, you have to hold control to activate it, because as a developer, you don't want to accidentally be toggling bookmarks and breaking stuff potentially. But the only things that I've done here for the fill is just 3 different colors. There's a lighter and then slightly darker, just to give it a click effect. There are a few different things you can do too. Back in the day, I used to actually have an outline turned on, and I would have the outline get a little bit bigger when I clicked. So I'd have it do that. And then I'd also, on hover, I'd shrink the text. So I'd start to make it look like you click it physically. But the more and more I got into design with everything, is I just started getting away from pseudo 3D. Anything that besides shadows is probably the one thing that I like, but anything that makes the actual object itself have bevels, bevels and other stuff like that. It eventually became like a bad taste for me in reports, and I got away from that. But as you can see, there's many different ways to create a click effect. This one also as well, it makes it look like the buttons, literally pressing in. But I find that just 3 colors, I think it even might have been on one of the monthly update reports that Power BI did, where I saw them just using basic colors for that. And I just found that it was a much cleaner way to design it, and there was less moving parts to have to update. Now, the trick that actually causes it to turn dark when you activate it, what do I want to turn on? Selection pane. So if I open up my date buttons, you'll notice that there's actually 2 versions of every one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this. So I actually have a second version of my day button selected in here. So when I activate that bookmark, not only does it update all of these, what it actually will do is it will update the selection in here. So I'm actually going to, let's set this back again. There we go. Oop, that's the one that I wanted. So if I click this, watch the little symbols over here, and you'll notice they'll flip. So I click day, and now this one became visible and this one turned off. So that's how it's able to create the effect that makes it look like it's been pressed. And that button is just sitting in the same location. And the difference being is just action of none. The reason that I actually have this turned on, though, is because I want the tooltip on there. And I'm actually going to test this. Previously, if I turn this off, yeah, see, if you turn the action off, you do not get a tooltip. So I want selected time perspective to show up to indicate that this has been turned on, but the action needs to be on for that. So that's why I have it set to bookmark type equals none. So that's essentially a way to have it have no action, but giving you the freedom to also show a tooltip in here. Because otherwise, as you've seen, if you toggle it off entirely, there's no way to do a tooltip on there anymore. So little small things for that. Last thing I'll mention about these, the way that I'm also able to get these to be pixel perfect on top of each other is I'm using something called Snap to Grid, which honestly is probably one of my biggest time savers when it comes to report development and design in here. That is turned on under the view ribbon, just Snap to Grid. And what that does is it, unlike the grid lines that PowerPoint, even Power BI has, those little red lines that align everything, I find that it's not always perfect, and sometimes it snaps to the wrong one. This just does 8 pixels. Every resize, every move. Like if I scooted this over, that's exactly 8 pixels. If I moved it to here, that is now 16 pixels away. So I size everything by this for the most part, like 99.9% of what I do. I basically just adhere to whatever the snap to grid is. My spacing between objects is exactly 1 snap away. So I always get perfect spacing, perfect alignment, and easy distancing from everything with little to no hassle. And if I created a second version of this button, let's just assume it's that big. I just come, set it on top, drag it out here, and it's instantly exactly where it should be with no hassle, no fuss. I don't have to come over to the general tab, touch any of these other settings. So it's a huge time saver for alignment and proximity on the pages. All right, so now let me actually create the bookmark in here. So we're at the day level. So I'm going to create a test bookmark to show you the capture settings and everything else at the quarter level. So that means to create the bookmark, we first have to set up the page in the correct capture state for it to grab all the correct settings, filters, etc. So that means that I'm going to take each of these visuals. I'm going to go up to the quarter level. There we go. And now let's go ahead and set my buttons up. There we go. Quarter is toggled, and then I need to flip the day one. There we go. So now the right button configuration has been set up for visibility and all of these visuals down here. So now I'm going to actually do something first. I'm going to select the visuals that I care about before I actually create the bookmark. So to start with, there we go. I'm going to select this. Now I'm doing this, by the way. If I select the group, it automatically selects everything inside of it. So that's why I'm just selecting the date buttons. So I'm going to select that one. And coming down here, I technically don't care about upgrading these two. I know it's just a background and a shadow object that I have into there, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to come in while holding wrong key, Control key, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what I'm doing is I am just selecting the buttons plus these selected visuals, all the other elements in that page, which would be anything else unrelated to this is essentially now not selected. So go to add bookmark. We're going to call this quarter test. And here, selected visuals, that is why I care about this and these. It corresponds to this. So now, when I've created this bookmark, it is only ever going to update the visuals that I have in these boxes. Also, as a side note, if you have the Snagit tool or the snippet for Microsoft, it's a good idea to take a screenshot and capture this, probably drop it into OneNote, and have a documentation about bookmarks for yourself in Power BI. Most of the things you can write notes on. DAX, you can put notes in there. Objects in the report, you can add descriptions. You can add descriptions to the tables, to the columns. Power Query, you can add notes. There's places in most of the model where you can sprinkle in information and notes as needed to describe what's going on. And that's normally what I primarily do is auto documentation or documentation inside of the report. Unfortunately, there's no way to in Power BI unless you created a new page and added a text box to record all this information. So I keep this in OneNote for any Power BI document I need for my own. If it's a client, I'll make like a Word document or a PDF. But the problem is, because after I create this, there's no way for me to come back later, turn that on, and just see like a list. What was I selecting at the time? The only way to really find that out, if you don't actually know, is you activate the bookmark and, okay, what changed on the page? And you hope you guessed it right. I would love someday for some type of a detail info page that could describe what settings were captured in the bookmark. But because there isn't, it is, like I said, recommended just to make a note, whether or not you do a screenshot, which to me is easier, just showing these highlights, or just write the note saying bookmark A, these 8 visuals with these friendly names. And it's also a good reason to make sure that you give a friendly name to everything in your selection pane, just as a little mention there. Now, data up here, as some of the capture groupings that we have, that will update the level of the hierarchy that I'm in. So I want to keep that. Display is actually the thing that is capturing whether or not any of these are visible or hidden. So I'm also going to keep that turned on. Current page means that this bookmark, if you're on another page, will navigate back here. Now, this bookmark is never going to be used on any buttons that is not on the page we just captured from. So I'm going to turn that off. So this is a little bit of a breadcrumb trail for me. It's indicating that data and display are the important parts here, and that we've also enforced selected visuals. And this would be something you have turned on most of the time, because it helps to enforce that you don't accidentally update or reset anything else that you have on your report page. All right, and now if we test this, I'm going to go to month. And let's just go ahead and activate my quarter bookmark right there. There you go. You can see that it updated the buttons at the top, and all the visuals on the page are now updated as well. And that pretty much encapsulates everything that I wanted to talk about to start with when it comes to just the button configurations that we see at the top, plus also a unique way to do a bookmark navigation experience. But this will also be a good spot to pause and see if there's any other questions. So let me check the chat window and see if anybody has a question here. I don't think I see any.
Don't think so, Reid. It looks like everything's good so far.
Cool. And just as a reminder for people, if you're welcome to type in the question ahead of time. I always give a 1 to 3 minute pause between each demo just to answer anything that I'm showing. All right, close that. And this one. It's a nice segue too into bookmarks and other types of capture states that they can bring up. Bedazzled and speech isn't great. Yeah, I should show up at one point just with like a bedazzled hat to do this presentation on. But I've already kind of mentioned the idea that there's a lot of different things that bookmarks can capture. Just hierarchy levels was one that I honestly never really thought of that as a capture state until a client asked for it. I had a similar scenario here where there was a client. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Here we go. But basically, is that like on the dashboard that you're building for me, I love the focus mode, but users have a hard time finding it. Is there a way for you to turn the visual header on and leave it on? Basically pin it so it is always there. And it's one of those I hadn't thought about that before, but all right, well, let me go. There has to be a setting for that, right? Just leave on, don't auto hide. And I checked everywhere in the visual headers, and unfortunately there actually is no setting for that. I would really like that ability someday in Power BI, just to enforce having that visible in a header of a visual, but it is not something you can do. So like I'm left with now kind of an impossible scenario, at least for the default actions in Power BI and the default header. But that's the only icon they cared about. They actually didn't want anything else. They didn't need the filter icon. They didn't need the additional options. They just wanted on this kind of really high level exec page the ability to pop out this visual. Fun thing is that is something that's captured by bookmarks. So I actually have a custom image in here, an icon that I found online. And if I click that, it does the same effect. So I basically, once published, what I did is I turned off the visual header entirely. A caveat with this, by the way, it's an annoying lack in Power BI Desktop, but there's no way to test its reader mode. So if I turn this off, when you publish it, the header will not be there. You cannot observe this effect in Power BI Desktop in any way. There's no option to go to modeling and view as reader mode or anything else. So I can't test what the published experience looks like without publishing the file. And as you can imagine, if you have like a 500 megabyte file that you are republishing and it takes 15 minutes, that can be a little tedious if you do a review to see what you missed. Make a change, publish and wait, make a change, publish and wait. So one downside to that is there's no view and reader mode in desktop. I had somebody from the CAT team was on one of my live streams recently, and I wish I remembered whom or who, but they took a note of that. So I actually think that might be something they'll finally talk to the product team on. But that's something I hope that comes someday, is a preview reader mode option in here. But with that turned off, I simply went to insert and I brought in a custom image. I just went online and I looked for an expand icon, and I found one that was free domain, meaning not trademarked or anything, and was free and accessible and usable. Pop that into the report page, and then the bookmark itself is extremely easy to capture for this. Let me turn that on. Okay, so all you have to do is turn on the selection as well. There you go. Again, select visuals is important. So I will select the only one that I care about, which will be the revenue by month. I'm going to create the environment that I need to, because I have to set up the environment that I want it to bookmark back to. And that, in this case, is the expanded focus mode for the visual. So I'm going to focus it out. It is selected. Now all I have to do is, let's see, focus demo. Make sure that selected visuals is enabled. And then I can turn off everything. I don't need data because I'm not doing anything related to data. And I'm not doing anything related to current page. Go ahead and go back, and this little icon here. And then there is an action for any image that you import. And in this case, focus demo. And if you click it, it does the action that you're expected it to. So super easy bookmark to set up, but it continuously shows you an expanding world of captures that are part of display. There is one other display capture that I want to mention. Most people think about it as the visibility that's over here. That's what we saw first. There is focus mode. One other feature that can be captured as part of this is the spotlight. That's where it kind of grays out everything else, spotlights that particular visual. If you've ever used the comments feature in Power BI, you'll notice that if you click on that comment, it actually spotlights that visual, and it takes you back to the filter state. It's automatically doing that for you if you actually use commenting, which is one of my favorite features in Power BI. Is if I had done all this and I clicked here, that would actually be captured as part of the bookmark state. But that's automatically done in the commenting feature, and that we've done manually. But there's many things that are captured as part of that display grouping of elements and settings to capture within a bookmark itself. All right. Trying to get that. There you go. If you go back. Last thing that I'll mention here, a couple of other important notes about layering, because as you can see, this is in front. So I want to prevent things like this. I don't want to click on any other object and make it accidentally pop up or anything like this. That can be avoided as long as you have any of your objects in the background. Make sure maintain layer order is turned on. It's important for the things that are in the back. So the things that you would want to turn it on for are here, because what this means is that they won't pop forward. It prevents things in the background from coming into the foreground. Because this is the very frontmost object, there's nothing for it to ever pop in front of. So technically, you don't need to turn maintain layer order on for that. But the two requirements for this to work is you have to have them in a group. If they are not in a group, it doesn't do anything. And then technically, the only things that need it are the back two objects. If you are worried about whether or not that will work or not, it's not going to hurt to also turn it on for all three. I'm just saying that if you turn it on for focus mode or turn it off, it has no effect because there's nothing for this to pop in front of. It's already the topmost element. The only things that has to be turned on for are the ones behind that. It's not well described in the documentation for maintain layer order, and it took me a couple of minutes and republishes to figure out exactly which ones I had to turn that on for. Because I initially assumed I just have to turn it on for the topmost object, and then I don't have to touch anything else, but it's you have to turn it on for the back objects. So we talked about a few things. Capturing bookmarks can allow you to capture the focus mode, using a custom icon for that, and then a combination of turning off the visual header and then using and maintain layer order. Make sure that it looks appropriate, nothing gets layered on top of each other inappropriately, and then again, once published in reader mode, which is only available to test in the service, you don't get these weird little pop-ups like that. Are there any questions on this demo?
It doesn't look like it. No. Still bedazzled, speechless.
No, I'm actually just checking the. I'm gonna copy that link that Win posted, because I actually can't remember if I voted on that or not, but that is something that I might go respond on later. There you go. So I'm making a note of that for myself, because that is something that very much should be voted on. It should, I believe, from my understanding from talking to the mic rep, it is an easy feature to add, and it is one of those like, oh wait, that's not in Power BI Desktop. No. Oh, well, we could probably fix that. All right, cool. Let me go ahead and close this one. Don't save changes. Where are we at for time? 46. Cool. All right. We've talked about two scenarios for bookmarks with a sprinkle of buttons in there. This topic is going to focus on how much customization you can actually do for a button itself. Now, this was one of my favorite ones that I've done recently. Again, coming from a client request. So they essentially, similar to like how phones have those little radio toggles and everything. They wanted a kind of a slider binary toggle to toggle between like two perspectives that they had, two visuals that would toggle back and forth. And that's what I created up here. Is I created a little toggle that allows you to, there you go, go back and forth between two elements. What the bookmark is switching between is less important. I just have visual A and visual B. The thing that I want to call out here is the actual button that I created. So I've managed to use a native button to do all of this. I make it a little bit bigger here. I have two versions of the button that are using nothing but native features and functions in Power BI to create that. When they first asked for it, my immediate thought, because technically you can add images to buttons, well, I could probably find an image online and or maybe make one myself in PowerPoint, or make it in Photoshop and do it that way. But the problem is then you have scaling issues because you're not registering vector in HTML5, so it can get a little blurry or stretched, and there's issues and considerations to have when you're importing images into the file. So, all right, well, before I go make an image file and have to do all this extra work, let's see if I can just configure a button in Power BI to do that. Like it's not that complex of a visual design. So let me go ahead and scoot you over here. Scoot, and here we go. Okay, so just like everything else we talked about, there are three primary settings that we have. One sec, in Power BI. Let me just close my. One sec. There you go. I was closing another window. I kept getting little pings in my ear. All right. We have three primary states. We have our default, hover, and press. And that is what is occurring each time you are observing the three states on here. We have our default slider on the right. Hover, I have now shifted the little moving button piece in the middle to the center. I've also gone with a neutral gray, just something to help kind of provide a transitionary color between the two of them. Then we have the button on the left. So the total effect essentially looks like you're sliding back and forth. Someday maybe there's like AI animation that can actually find the diff between the two and actually track it and move it across, which would be awesome. But it gives the intended effect. It's darn near close to what I would like it to be, as a perfect scenario without an actual animation. Some of the fun things that I've done to get this, to start with, the little symbol that we have in here, that's actually just standard text. The way that I got it is Windows has a magical emoji keyboard. If you hold the Windows key and press period or colon, you get this little wonderful pop-up of all the emojis and everything that you can bring in there. And then anything you type in as text, I'll type in circle. I now have a word that's underlined, and then here's all the circle things that I can actually use. And I really like the little white one because it has a black outline. It actually looks pretty clean versus just like a black dot or something else. I like the two-tone color. So I ended up using just an emoji in here, an emoji white circle as my slider in the actual button itself. And then the thing that I'm doing with the state is my horizontal alignment. I love the fact that the button text has vertical and horizontal alignment. That's also one of those things that, like, why doesn't the single value card have this? We'll get to that in a minute. But I love the fact that, I can choose that. I can choose where my text goes, and height-wise, I have full control over that to place it basically in any quadrant in the box itself. And it is something that I've begrudgingly told the product team a couple of times. Like a single value card, it would be nice to choose where to place the number in the middle. Like center is nice as the default, but if they have the customization here for this object, it can't be that hard to include it in a different visual. So there's little nuances and annoyances that I have with working with the product 8 hours a day. But at least it's available here, and that allows me from the default, the on hover state is in the middle, which gives me that one, and then the press state, I'm on the left. So I was able to create this nice seamless transition between the two of them. Thanks, Wynn. One of the other things that I'll mention with this is because we are using an emoji keyboard, you need to be careful of the libraries for this, because this is the Microsoft library. Microsoft's emoji library has like the thicker borders and the black lines. It's kind of more of a flat finish. There's not really anything 3D. Apple shares the majority of these. Like there is a, what's this one called? Grinning face with sweat. Like most libraries have a grinning face with sweat emoji. Apple, Android, Windows, Linux. So I'm sure there's another one out there. However, the icon might look slightly different. The Apple one, they have a bit of shading, so it's a slightly more 3D looking face. I don't quite know what the Android one looks like. But if you're being very particular about the symbol that you're using in here, this has actually been out since Windows 8. So the Windows key and holding the Windows key and pressing colon anywhere when you're typing on your computer, it pops it up. It's like a hidden feature of Windows, essentially. It's not part of Power BI. It's a Windows system feature. But yeah, just be considerate of that, because you don't want to publish something and then have the icon change, and then people are wondering why it looks different, especially if they're very strict on their like design policy, for some organizations. So just a consideration. It's a small one, but just think about who's using it, and then double check that the device that they have is supporting it, because there are some small number of emojis that like different companies release that are like exclusive to theirs until the other companies add them later on in the year. It's like a future update to their operating systems. But just something I wanted to mention as a side note. A couple of other things that I'll talk about in here. The outline. So the way that I got this nice bevel is I actually have that set to 20. Otherwise, we get a standard flat box, square box that is the typical button experience. But if you bevel that a bit, that actually work. There we go. It will add the bevel to there. The one thing that I will mention that again, annoyances that I have. So outline settings. Everything in here should turn off when I turn off this on switch. The outline doesn't turn off. Everything else in there does, but essentially is like the rounded edges, because I've disabled the entire feature of outline. There should be no more beveled edges because I can't go and change it now. So to technically change the beveled edge that is turned off, I have to turn it on and turn it off again, essentially, for an IT crowd joke. And I have to come in here, put 0, and then I have to turn it off. So I think that's a bug, not a feature. If you turn a menu off entirely, I think it should disable all the settings in here. The weight, transparency, all of that should go away because there is no outline. Therefore, nothing can be beveled. But just another consideration of yours is if you are going to disable it for any reason, make sure that you reset the settings in here, especially the rounded edges, because otherwise you're kind of blocked out of adjusting it until you come back and turn that on. And then the last thing that I've done, simply, I repeat the fill states with the right, center, and left with the 3 different colors that I have into there, just to give it the consistency. And as we've already seen in the first demo, these are technically just stacked on top of each other like that. And it would be, there we go. Oh, come on. Oh, they're up there. And with Snap to Grid, it makes it super easy. There we go. To have them pixel perfect on top of each other. So, when I toggle it, it just turns one off, turns the other on. But that's how I created a little toggle mode switch and the intended outcome, because I won't create the bookmark again. That was already covered. But you get that little slider effect back and forth between these two when you activate that. Any questions on this one? And mobile, yeah, the button that I've observed when you're using native features like this, it will render the one thing that may or may not is, again, that emoji icon. That depends on the device that you're running it on. This white circle, back when we had Windows phones, that circle would look the same. Now it does look a little different on Android and iPhone devices. You'll still have a white circle there, but you might need to do some font size adjustments and other stuff to make sure that it still looks correct. So that just, again, it was a good thing to bring up with those considerations. Any other questions, though? If not, I will, excuse me, spin up my next one. Yeah, all right, let's do this one. 55, okay. Another client scenario of mine. So what we have is, again, just a business scenario. One of my larger clients that I've worked on and off with over the last few years kind of already has a design department. So for the most part, they hand me a mock-up of like 8 pages and like, here's what we want our dashboard to look like. But you build the model that will support it and create this, amazing looking experience. And one of their little mock-ups was a card that looked like this, that would have like a gauge that would tell via color whether or not this number essentially it worked against a comparison. So it's versus the plan number. If it was below the plan, have it red. If it was above the plan, have it green. So there's no visual that looks like this in Power BI. But what I did work around and through is what visuals can I layer together and group to create an experience that makes it appear like this. So I'll start with the initial concept that I had, and then I'll talk to you about the one that I built that was a reduction. And talk to you about the considerations why. So V1 of this looked like this. And technically what this is, turn on my selection pane as well. You should actually be, here we go. You should. It's 3 different objects. We have a card, single value card at the top. This middle object is a button, and this bottom object was another card. However, there are some considerations that I want to bring up is when you're building out a report page, every object, regardless of the size of the model, what the measure is that's being used in it, or the filters that you have, there is some time that is required, processing power required to render the visual on the page. So if you have too many unique visuals, you can start to hit a performance limit where I'll just show you. Performance analyzer, you can just observe that. If I click here, let's just go ahead and refresh visuals. Yeah, like you'll see that some of these, like the DAX query is taking 4 milliseconds. Like the time to load the visual is actually where most of the actual processing power is going into. So it's a quick side note of that, but it's something to consider. And the reason that I actually tried to find a way to improve this is 3 visuals was just a bit too much. Like, all right, well, I can do this in 3, but if I have 3 visuals per card and I have 8 cards on the page, that's 24 unique visuals that I have to have. So like, how do I optimize this? How do I, make it better, stronger, and faster? So my final solution was what we have over here. So technically, it's still a couple of objects, but I'm going to ungroup you. So now what I have, get rid of this. There you go. I have a button at the top, and I have a single value card at the bottom. So it is 2, which is, this is probably something even today you can make a charticulator if you really wanted to, but just having a couple of these on the page is not going to really have any performance impact for the most part. Like I'm not adding 30 visuals to the page. I may be adding 5 or 7. And that's still, at the end of the day, my rule of thumb is if a person loads a web page and it's less than about 3 to 4 seconds max is what it should be taking. If it's taking any longer than that, they're going to start noticing it, and it's going to be something they have to wait. And then every time they click a slicer, all the visuals have to refresh. So that starts to become an annoyance for people. But this was optimized enough that I was happy with the end product with just these 2. But there's a couple of clever tricks that I did with this. So to start with, the button here at the top is just 2 things. The title is actually this top section. Oop. My zoom it sometimes gets a little tricky. Here we go. Title is up here, and the button itself is this. The little red bar, that is the actual normally clickable button, but I've turned a button into a visual in this instance. So I move this out. That's the actual button. This normally would be, if I was to like put some text into here, that normally would be the clickable button, but I disabled all actions and I reduced the size to a very thin sliver, essentially creating a narrow little, health bar that sits right there at the top. Now that part was easy enough. What I have done in here is there's an option with conditional formatting. Anytime you see this f of x symbol, that means that you could apply some type of formatting logic instead of just having it be one color. And I just have a measure called completed KPI colors, and I'll briefly show it, but the goal of this is not really to talk about the calculations as much as where you can apply them. So completed KPI color. I just have a couple variables for a red and green color. I calculate, if it's greater than or equal to 0, green, otherwise return red. So the logic is in my measure. You could have also set that up in rules, but I like measures because they are pocketable and reusable. So this logic I can use in multiple occasions, potentially if I need to. And that's simply just providing the color logic. So as things change, I click different values, it changes the color because the conditions have been changed. So that's how I was able to create the background for that. And I have the action off. Everything else is off other than just the fill in the title in the background in this case. And the title also is a dynamic calculation. So normally you'd have, generic flat title. But what I did, there we go. I have a measure in here of completed amount. This was how I was able to combine the top two into one. Because technically, to have a DAX measure funnel into the title, it has to be outputting in a scalar value text format or a data type of text. You cannot put a number into there. You cannot put a date into there. It can look like a number. It can look like a date, but it has to actually be a text data type. And that's what I did in here as well. Let's see, where are you at? No. What was the name? Completed amount. Okay, got it. This one. Pretty straightforward. Just like in Excel, if you use the format function, it takes the value, converts it to text, and displays it in whatever formatting you provided. So I took the sum of completed, and then I formatted it to include comma separators, and that's what the number is at the top. So yes, you have to add a second measure to do this, a dedicated one to go into the title, because otherwise, you can't reference this measure because it's text. You can't sum it. You can't do a prior year because, it's doing that on a text value now. But the cost is pretty low. You have an extra measure in your model. Maybe you hide it just to keep it cleaned up because it's only being used for the title. But now in a single button, I'm able to show two of the elements that I want. The title, which is basically the card, smack dab at the top with a big font size, and then the bar at the bottom. And then the bottom one is just a measure that has about a bunch of concatenations where I'm showing the variance. I'm doing some icons and some other stuff. Again, I'll just show you just so you can see maybe how I write my measures a bit. But I basically declared a variable for the percentage of the targets and then a little concatenated text string. What the percentage is, whatever the arrow should be, up or down, with versus plan with a couple spaces in there, and then the target. So that total, equals a little printed readout, essentially to give somebody the details below that. There we go. And then once you have those created, if you highlight and just select them and group them, like in PowerPoint, you have a single object you can create onto your page that then becomes the card that you have there. And in this case, I would recommend, like a completed KPI card, giving it some type of a friendly name. Any questions on this one?
Not looking like it, Reid, just bedazzling again.
Exactly. Well, I like buttons. They're super useful in many things besides just actual actions. Close that one down. Let's do this one. I think this would be a good one too to also, I think, probably wrap up after this one. So, a bunch of buttons that we have on the page. You can see some of the effects that I'm also showing as well. This is where, this is also one of the reasons that I picked the word bedazzling for this top, is some of these are very sparkly and shiny and are doing many different things. You can see that all the 4 buttons in the middle, they have a shimmer. They have a sheen that goes back and forth. Because I kind of, again, had a client scenario where they're like, hey, is there anything you can do to, without actually having to write like click me, to kind of visually indicate to people coming in, because I was creating a report that was going to go on a public site landing page, and they constantly get an influx of new users, and you can't create like a video to show them how to use the report. So they needed, for people who are laying their eyes on the report for the first time, they needed a way to hint to click on something onto the page. So I came up with the idea of creating like a GIF that provides this little sheen and everything that goes onto the page itself and highlights these buttons. I also had some fun and created some other versions. I Googled like CSS effects for buttons just to see what was out there. The sheens came up that were my favorite ones, but you can also have ones like this where there's a little marquee scroll. The fun part was actually creating the GIFs that have perfect loops. So I'll actually show you how I made marquee scrolling of the kind of just raindrops in the background. Not one I would probably ever put into a report. I was just having some fun to see what I could do, and then I built a little hyperdrive GIF at the bottom that shoots you into hyperspace whenever you hover or click over it. But to start with, I'll just show you how I added these, which was pretty straightforward, and then I want to show you the PowerPoint document that I built these in. I made these all in PowerPoint, by the way. I didn't use Photoshop because as part of my YouTube video release for this, I wanted to give people a file that they could all open and they could all make. And PowerPoint has an option for GIF exports. So we'll see that in a second. But the thing that I did in here is it's the fill section. So let me go ahead and delete this one. There we go. So the fill can have an image add to it. For the default, hover and press. And you can have a different image in any of these. And when you add an image, notice that you have TIFF, PG. I'm not going to read all of them, but among the types that you have in here is a GIF. So you can actually have an animated image file that you can upload into this to create some of those effects. So what I did for a few of these is these ones in the bottom four, they're all the same animation. Each single of the buttons are the same animation looping for those. The top two actually have a static image for the first one, and then the back two for the click and press are the actual animations. And the way that I get the click effect as well, if I go to fill, let's do this one. So notice that for the default state, I have a picture with a 50% transparency. On hover as well, I do that. There's a 50% transparency shown onto it. But the way I get that darker color when I click is it's the same GIF, but now there's 0% transparency. There you go. So actually what it is this is the true color of the GIF. The actual button that I made in PowerPoint, it's actually this dark of a color, but with 50% transparency, it gets lighter. So I still have that 3 click state, 1, 2, and 3 to give that, tactile press feel in there. Now let me actually go ahead and show you the file for this. Give me 1 sec to load it up. Presentations. Here we go. And animated buttons. All right, this is the PowerPoint. Bunch of different slides in here, and each one of these was a slide that I exported. And I also very specifically chose the objects that would not become apparent if you warped them. So let me just start by walking through the animations and everything. So this slide in here, sheen goes across, 4-second pause, sheen comes back. So what that means, if we actually look at the animation in here, if I can zoom in on this, there we go. I want to draw. So this right here, that is 2 seconds. This is 4 seconds. That is 2 seconds, okay? So there is a 2-second animation that occurs, a 4-second pause, and a 2-second animation. So the total thing in here takes 8 seconds. That is the entire length of the animation track on this slide. Now, where's my cursor? There we go. So if we come up to recording, we go to export, there's an option to create a GIF. Now, because this slide only takes 8 seconds, if I make it 12 seconds, here's where the perfect loop comes in. 2-second animation that goes across, 4-second gap, animation comes back. Now, because I've asked it to make this slide, this GIF, 12 seconds long, that now adds a 4-second pause before it loops back again at the end, which now means that basically between every animation, you have 4 seconds, sheen animation, 4 seconds, back sheen animation, and then it rinses and repeats in a perfect loop every time. So and that's one of the important things with GIFs is you want to make sure that you don't have a jarring stop and reset, because otherwise then people can tell it's kind of like looping it, think of like an old movie where you watch it and it starts to like twitch or shudder. Like you don't want to have those effects in a perfectly looped GIF. So I timed it to make sure that my export allowed me that trail amount to basically, at the end of it, I had one here, and then just imagine that that export popped another 4-second pause, and then it loops all the way back, and then restarts again. It's my terrible arrow drawn with a mouse key. And similar on these other ones that I did, I made every single button in here. There's my animation here as well. It just an animation that tracks it at the bottom. The only thing that I had to do on this one was similarly, you want to stop it at the same frame it will start. So that means that if I'm going to have this animated over, it has to stop exactly on top of them. If it stops here or like here, you're going to have that jump where it glitches, it stops, and then it immediately resets to the next one, and you'll know when it loops. So as long as those things are perfectly on top of each other like this, it's going to create that perfect loop. Same thing that I did down here. This one was a little trickier because the wallpaper is not exactly aligned. But as you can see from the overlay, I tried to get it as close as possible. So it is pretty hard to notice much of a glitch in this one. But that's really the goal of any of these. It's just making sure that if you create any of those button animations, you loop it. And it does stretch a bit. Like notice how vertical these are. But in the Power BI file, they're a little bit more angled because that 16:9 PowerPoint has been stretched. But because they're not detailed, there's no expectation they have to be more vertical. So the user will never know that it's been stretched out. Same with the little bar sheen that comes across this. There's no indication that it's been stretched in any way because it's not a detailed piece. The hyperdrive and some other stuff, and you can kind of observe it a bit with raindrops or a little fat, but as long as you avoid anything that's very detailed, it doesn't matter if you do a fit to object or resize it. It will resize that slide and stretch it out to fit the box, but because the animation has that lack of detail other than the large objects, it could never be observed that it's a warped image by the end user. All right. Are there any questions on this one that I can cover? Comments in
yeah, I'm seeing
flashing text boxes.
Comments I'm seeing, but I'm not seeing any questions there, Reid. I think you've kind of blown people's minds with the bedazzling.
Like you gotta give them the old razzle dazzle, right? All right. I do know where. Let's see. Let me see if I can get one more quick one because the next one's normally a bit longer. I'll skim over, but just talk a little bit about some other features that I rather liked with buttons, and we'll cover this as a way to wrap up. And then, if you have questions now, more open-ended questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or we'll come off mute here in a little bit. But this is just the last thing that I want to mention as just the number of elements that you can interact with and customize for buttons. So one thing they added actually might have been 2 years ago now. I always lose track of Power BI time of how long ago this came out, but they recently, in my mind, added a feature where you could actually have a button that acts as a drill through. Notice that the button goes from an inactive state to an active state. So many different cool things that can be customized on it. Right now, it's asking you to make a filter selection. If I hover over it, it also has a tooltip that is customized to request that you make a filter selection. If I click this, it is now, the button has changed its formatting. It is now darker. It also now actually can be clicked. And you notice that the tooltip and the text on the button is also now customized. If I change the page that I also want to drill through to, like marketing details instead, both the tooltip and the button also got updated. So many different elements can be configured onto these to make it concise and clear exactly what you need to do from the end user before you can use this. So like that's where that disabled comes into play. So for the disabled here, this one's actually just manual. I typed in the button text to make a filter selection, but for all these other ones on press or hover default, etc., you just you can supply the DAX measure into there to have it dynamically change, which is how we're able to get all these other little things that pop up into there. So let me go ahead and open up some of these. Again, the measure is a little less important than the actual effect itself that I'm showing you, but I will just give you a little bit of indication on that. I basically have done a filter into here because country and class just to give you some points of reference for the filter, that is what is in these two right here. The two wells basically for this comparison on this chord visual is between country and class. So if there's a filter on either of these, that's just doing a check. Basically, this will return true if either there's a filter on country or in class. And simply if it's true, then it drills through to, and this is simply capturing the slicer selection from here. So that is whatever filtered page I've selected. And then conversely down here, otherwise make a filter selection. So basically either ask you to select some kind of visual filter for drill through, or otherwise it will then give the drill through to, and then this provided page number. That's essentially the exact same practice that I did for both the button and the tooltip text. There we are. And I come back to the button. Here we go. And the action itself is pretty straightforward. When you set up drill through, you can either tell it to go to a very specific page, or again, you have the FFX symbol and that measure right here. I think it's hidden. Yes, page navigation. I have an FFX symbol for, I'm sorry, wrong one. There we go, destination. Called selected page. And that, there we go, I couldn't see the forest for the trees. That's simply describing the name. So I can dynamically also tell it to go to different pages depending on whatever the page name is from this disconnected table that I have for page name, which is what is being harvested here. That lets me make a single selection between either of these. And then if I actually activate it, there you go. It took me to industry details, and then I applied those filters that are over here. So you kind of see the drill through functionality, but the larger goal was just to show you that you have a lot of different elements that you can provide breadcrumb trails to help customers and clients make sure that they're using the buttons appropriately, and to really make it clear what they need to do to get something to activate, whether or not it's an animation or in this case, just tooltips, text, colors. So many things can be customized on buttons. I'll use that to wrap up for my demonstration. So I'll open up questions to what we just discussed with drill through. I'll also just broaden the conversation up to just Power BI in general as we wrap up. And show how to set up the ribbon chart above. Yeah, this ribbon chart's a pretty straightforward chart. I mean, I only have three things. I have month, I have color, and then units. You pick whatever you want to display on the axis. Typically, it's a stack column chart with ribbons in there, and all of this is done automatically. So it as soon as you add something into the legend, that's what makes the ribbons. So I'm going to go ahead and put color back in there. Yeah, it automatically makes them for you. So it basically just reorganizes your stacked column chart with whatever highest value is at the top in there. But it's one of my favorites. I think it tells a great story. It can show you how something can go from first, back down. In this case, there's a situation where we had somebody that typically was performing in third place that had a really good month in May. But it really shows the journey over time, especially when things are ranked or competing against each other. Yeah, exactly. I mean, for Jennifer, like, you didn't realize how many FFX symbols were there. They're everywhere. Legend. I can change the color of my legend if I wanted to for the text in there. Anytime you see that FFX symbol, I can change the axis color. Ribbon chart's probably not as good of an example as some others, but there are lots of places to be able to do that. Most of the colors are there. I do think at some point, I will not be surprised if we start seeing them here. I know it's in their vision to be able to essentially any adjustable value can eventually become adjustable through a measure. So like, it would be really great if you had a single value card. If it's really good, if that number is really high, maybe make that value bigger. If the value is low, make the value smaller. So like, dynamic things like that. So I guarantee that they'll continue to add more and more of this. I don't know their exact timeline for it, but I know the team is working to basically pepper the report with these FFX symbols in as many meaningful places as possible, or even like decimal places. Anything that you can normally type in a fixed number, so at some point you can have a measure that will have a condition that will then return like a 1 or a 2, and then you can eventually supply it in places like this. All right, any other questions?
It looks like you got a couple in. What are the paths in the pie chart that you have down the bottom?
This guy?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, so this is the short visual. It's a custom visual you can get from this from the store. I also have a little tooltip that explains it. It shows you where the distribution is. The United States, you can see the majority of U.S. sales went to the regular category. Some went to economy. So it typically shows the relationship between two sets of categorical breakouts. It's one of my favorite visuals. I really like to see like where you can follow and track the data between stuff and just follow the paths kind of from an A to B comparison. But it's made by Microsoft and it's available directly from the Visual Store.
Cool. All right. Another one, I think, is there a technique to show or hide or navigate to a report page based on role?
Somewhat, yeah. So I did a video on this that's on my YouTube channel a couple of months ago where the choices for page navigation changed based on the role of a security that I've set up in the model. So I'd recommend checking out my channel. I think it's only maybe 10 or 15 videos back, but you'll see it on my uploads list. But basically there might be like 10 pages, but if there's a page that's sensitive and only Mark and Sarah should see that and Steve and Henry shouldn't, if you have role of a security set up in your model, you can have it where they log in, a couple people can see all 4 pages that they want to see, and then other people who don't have access to that sensitive information, their ability to navigate to them will be reduced. And that can be accomplished where you hide all your pages and you enforce that the only way to navigate is through a drop down and then a button that says, take me to this page. So it essentially allows you to enforce page level security in a report itself rather than like measures and a few other stuff. So I have a video on that. I might even grab it at the very end when Ken's wrapping up and I'll post it in the chat here.
Perfect. I don't see any other questions at all at the moment. So I think at this point in time, it pretty much is the time to wrap up. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to share, Reid. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take over the screen again real quick because I kind of want to end on this slide right here and basically sort of throw this out there that if you enjoyed the stuff, I mean, first off, Reid, thanks very much for the presentation today. I mean, the stuff is mind-blowing. You do some incredibly cool stuff with these things. And for anybody here that's watching, I mean, if you want to learn how to do this, you really got to check out Reid's course. I mean, this is what it's all about, is all these little tips and tricks to make things look awesome. So you can find that at SkillWave. Definitely recommend you have a look at it. So